Welcome to Gever Hakam, where the wise get wiser. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And we're also going to look at a couple keywords, but there's not many that start with this word or with this letter. So we're going to be really just looking at one keyword that is very, very, very common, probably almost in every verse of the Bible. And along with that, we're going to read and talk about three really important verses from the beginning of Exodus, that great book where the nation of Israel is birthed, and we learn about the great leader of Israel, Moses. So let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be talking about this sixth letter of the alphabet, and we're going to practice the Hebrew alphabet just as a reminder. But before we get into that, I did want to just give us a little bit of an encouragement, maybe even a bit of a warning. I was just reading today from the book of 1 Timothy written by Paul, and I was really taken by how much emphasis he puts on the necessity, or perhaps we might say the danger, of those who want to not just read and understand the scriptures as they are, but who want to go beyond it and begin speculating and even debating over very trivial things. He even goes so far as to say pursuing and listening to deceiving spirits and doctrines and teachings from demons. Now, that sounds pretty harsh, but we also have to realize that it's really not our place to go beyond the Word of God. Our duty and our goal is really just to understand what God has given us and to try to interpret it and understand it with a pure heart, with the purpose that it was intended for. And I'm oftentimes reminded of perhaps one of my favorite verses, which is found in Deuteronomy 29:29. And there it says that the hidden things, the things that are not known, belong to the Lord. But those things that are revealed, they must be done, right? So the principle is really just that there are many things that God does not tell us or disclose to us about the world. But he does tell us some things, those things that we find in Scripture. And we're required to do them, and to do them with integrity and with passion, right? Honoring the Lord with our life and everything that we do. And so maybe just as a warning, I know a lot of times as we study the Bible, we are tempted to go down rabbit holes and get caught up in debates over particular ideas. But I would say that it's our duty to stick to the Word and interpret it as well as we can with a heart for what leads us to the heart of God and to help people, to serve people and bring them to know God in a deeper way. So endless myths and genealogies and such like this, as Paul says, ultimately are not as profitable as simply just sticking to the Word. So we're studying Hebrew in order to do just that. All right, well, let's go ahead and look at this sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and again, a review of the alphabet itself. So the letter here is called the Vav, or the Wow, depending on the time that you're mentioning this. So in modern times, it's referred to as the Vav, but in ancient times, it was called the Wow, because many scholars believe that it was actually pronounced more with a W sound than a V sound. But in modern times, it's generally just pronounced with the V sound, as in Vav rather than Wow. So you might hear some people pronounce it a little bit different, perhaps depending on their tradition or whether they want to emphasize the ancient version or the modern. All right, well, let's go ahead and also do a quick review of our Hebrew alphabet. So I'm going to go through it quickly, and then we'll go through it slowly together. So we have here Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin. Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun. Samik, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right. Well, let's do it a little more slowly. So take out a piece of paper and a pen and try to write these out. Maybe even pause and try to do it yourself. And we'll go through it here a little more slowly. All right. So we have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, and Tav. All right, very good. So let's go through it a little more quickly again. So we have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin. Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun. Samik, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right, very good. All right, so let's talk about the letter Vav and how it's written. Well, this is perhaps one of the easiest letters, very simple. It's literally just one stroke that fills the whole space here, in between, of course, our space lines. So just one stroke, vertical stroke, and that's it. There's really nothing else to it. Now, you'll notice that in this font, and what's often in many of the fonts, is sometimes you'll have this kind of fancy top piece to it, as you see here. And that, again, is a part of many of the fonts, so you have to be aware of that. But in some of the more simplified fonts, you will notice that it's literally just a straight vertical line, as we see here. Now this one, again, is basically just a vertical line, but it does have a little something at the top here. Now, that's normally not a big deal. You see another one here, very similar, has a little bit more of a top piece to it. And we can also look just briefly at some of the historical forms. So in the Paleo Hebrew, you'll remember that's from about the Babylonian exile to the time of the Judges. It looks like this. So pretty similar, not too different. Now, in the earlier versions, the Proto-Sinaitic, from about the time of the Judges to perhaps Abraham, it again looks very simple, very similar. The later one is perhaps just a little bit more simplified, but really all of them are pretty close, from the ancient Proto-Sinaitic to the Paleo to even the Babylonian square script, modern type of Hebrew that we have today. So all pretty similar. And as I mentioned, you'll see that this is pronounced either as a V sound or a W sound for the Vav, or the wow sound. And again, that just really depends on whether you're wanting to be more true to ancient pronunciation or a more modern pronunciation. I typically will pretty much always refer to it as the V sound, and that's just because how I learned it. But the W sound is perfectly fine, and that's also very common. Now, as you might suspect, this is the sixth letter, so it actually represents the number 6. So, for instance, if we had Genesis 6, that would be Bereshit Vav, Bereshit Vav, Genesis 6. So this is number 6, particularly in later Hebrew. Now, one thing I did want to bring up here is one of our key words. So one of our key words here, that is, as I mentioned, perhaps the most common word in the whole Bible. And that is this word, sometimes translated and. But as you can see here, it's honestly, there's a lot of different possibilities. But, then, so, now, sometimes just not even translated at all, just left blank in the English. And that's because this word is a very broad or flexible word in Hebrew. And we've mentioned this and talked about this a little bit in some of our other lessons. So by now, this should actually be a pretty familiar word for you. So let me read some of the different variations. We have the, va, and oo. Now, these different sounds from the different vowels do have grammatical purposes or some reasoning to why they're slightly different. But we will talk about that later on in a more grammar-focused lesson. So for now, just be aware that these are the three different forms that you'll typically see for the word vav or and. And as we'll see, even in our different verses here, can be translated or imply slightly different meanings, depending on the context. All right, now there is actually a word that means, or that is the word vav, and it means something like a nail or a peg, or actually it's really mostly used in the sense of like a hook from the temple or the tabernacle, where they would hang the curtains and things like that. So it's not a very common word, but it does appear mostly with the tabernacle. And that's the word vav, or in ancient times, wow. And that was a peg or a hook or something like that. Well, as I mentioned, there's actually not many words that start with the vav. And that's probably because it was used as the word and so much that it would be very perhaps confusing if you had a bunch of words that started with the letter vav. So it seems that the ancient Hebrew speakers avoided words that would start with the vav. And so we don't have many words with the vav. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about and read our verses. And so we're going to look at 3 verses from Exodus 1 and the first verse from chapter 2 as well. And this is where the nation of Israel is birthed. It's where we've learned about Moses and that great prophet and leader of Israel. And so really a wonderful book. And just like Genesis was the foundation and beginnings of so much for the whole of the Bible, well, Exodus also is really the foundations for so much of the rest of the Bible as well, especially as it pertains to the people of Israel. We get the giving of the Torah in Mount Sinai, and of course the whole wandering period, which at least begins here in Exodus, though it becomes more explicit and pronounced in Numbers. All right, well, let's go ahead and read our passage here. So we have Ve'ele Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot. And depending on who you hear it from, this might be pronounced a little bit more like Shemot or more like Shmot. So, Ve'ele Shmot. All right. And what does Ve'ele Shemot mean? Well, we have our word here, right? And and then the word ele, which means these. And then we have our word shmot, which is from the word shem, meaning name. And so this ending here is, as we'll learn down the road, a plural. So names, plural. So, and these names. Now, one thing we'll talk about later on down the road, one of the pieces of grammar, is that oftentimes in Hebrew, they will not include a verb where we as English speakers need to include a verb. And that's just because that's how English is, okay? In ancient Hebrew, it's perfectly fine to simply say, ve'ele shemot. And it means these are the names. All right, so let's go to our next part of the verse here. So we have Bnei Israel. Bnei Israel. Bnei Israel. Bnei Israel. Now, we did learn this word. And what does this word mean? Bnei? That's right. Sons of. Sons of. And then, of course, our very important and famous word here, Israel, right? So the sons of Israel. Now, sons can be literally sons, but it can oftentimes just be used generically in the sense of the people or descendants of, right? In the kind of tribe or nation sense. So here, of course, it's, meaning probably like elders in the sense of like heads of the tribes of this nation of Israel. All right. Okay. So let's look at some more of this verse. So the next part we have here is ha-ba'im, ha-ba'im, mitzrayimah, mitzrayimah. So ha-ba'im, mitzrayimah, mitzrayimah. Ha-ba'im, mitzrayimah. And so here we have the word those entering or those coming to, and then Mitzrayim is the word for Egypt. So Mitzrayimah is means like those coming to Israel, Egypt. So those entering Egypt, Mitzrayim. All right. So the sons of Israel. So these are the names, the sons of Israel, those who came or who were entering to Egypt, et Yaakov, et Yaakov, et Yaakov, which is meaning with Jacob, Yaakov, Jacob. So those entering into Egypt with Jacob, right? So, of course, the sons of Israel, those entering with Jacob, who is also called Israel. All right, and then we have Ish, U, Veto, Ba'u. Ish, U, Veto, Ba'u. Ish uvato ba'u. Ish uvato ba'u. And so hopefully you remember this word as well. We've seen this one. Ish. What does ish mean? Man. That's right. Good. So man. And then look, we have one of those forms of the word and, u. So let me highlight that for us. So man and bet, which we've seen this word as well, bet, which means house. And then o, which is the pronoun meaning his. So, and his house. And then ba'u, they entered or they came. So this word ish means man, but it's kind of an interesting idiom in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, where sometimes the word ish can mean something more like each or each and every man. So a little bit more generically. So each man or each and every man and his house, meaning again, his tribe or literally his family. Talking about, again, the sons of Israel, probably literally the 12 sons of Israel, but then also more generically in the sense of the descendants of Israel, of Jacob. And then, of course, each of them according to their tribe or their group, their family. All right. And then we have here, Vayamot Yosef. Vayamot Yosef. Vayamot Yosef. So we have Va. So again, we have another one of these ands. So we've seen the Ve, the U, and now the Va. And they really just mean and, though, they could mean something like but or so, then just depending on the context. But in each of these, for the most part, you might be able to just translate them as and. So here we have, and he died, that is Joseph. So, and Joseph died. So, and Joseph died, the root word here being mot or mut, meaning to die. And then we have vekol echav. Vekol echav. So we have here another the, and like I said, is probably the most common word in the entire Bible. So you're going to see it pretty much almost in every verse, which is an interesting thing because in English, at least, we generally don't like to say and too much. So in a lot of places where we would not use and, the Hebrew is perfectly fine to use and, or the word va, the. And so that's why in English, sometimes you'll see a variety of different words used. So, then, but, and a variety of other things. All right. So, and, kol, all, and all, echav, echav. And I should have highlighted this, but this means his. And then ach is the word for brothers. So, and all his brothers. So Joseph died and all of his brothers. And then we have here vekol, hador, hahu. Vekol chador hahu. Vekol chador hahu. All right. So we have here again this and, the v. So and, kol, all, hador. Now we just looked at the word door when we were learning the letter D or Dalet. So, and all, or the whole generation, or perhaps this, as we'll see here, hahu, which means this. So, and all this generation, right? So Joseph died, all of his brothers died, and the whole generation, right? So in other words, no one's alive who entered into Egypt with Jacob in that time period, right? So times have changed. All right. So time has passed. There's a new Pharaoh in town, so to speak, right? A new generation has arisen, and it says that Pharaoh doesn't know who Joseph is, no longer recalls, and he begins persecuting the Jewish people or the Israelite people under his reign, who are living in Egypt. and begins, of course, oppressing and enslaving and forcing them into hard labor. And so this is when God responds to the cry of the people, as we see later on in Exodus. But in Exodus 2 is where we begin hearing about Moses. Now, in verse 1, it doesn't specifically mention Moses, but it tells us just a little bit about his parents and where he came from. So let's read this together. So we have Vayelek Ish mi bet Levi. So again, Vayelek Ish mi bet Levi. Vayelek Ish mi bet Levi. All right, so what do we have here? Well, as you might suspect at this point, there is an and on the front here. So, and he went Ish. What does Ish mean? A man. Good. So, and a man went mi bet. So, mi is that word from. So, from bet. And that's another one we've learned before. So what does the word bet mean? House. Good. So from the house of Levi. Levi, which is the name, Levi, right? So one of the 12 sons or 12 tribes of Israel, of Jacob. All right. And then the last part of this verse here, we have Vayikak et bat Levi. Vayikak et bat Levi. Levi. So what do we have here? Well, we have another and. So and yikach, which is a word meaning to take. Literally it means to take, but sometimes it can mean in the sense of like to marry, right? So he took et bat. And we also learned the word bat, if you remember. What does bat mean? That's the word for daughter. Good. So a daughter of Levi. So remember, this et typically doesn't get translated into English because, again, it's not necessary. But it is helpful and important in Hebrew because what it tells us here is that he took a daughter of Levi. Now, if he didn't have this et in here, it could mean instead that, or it could be a little bit confusing for the daughter, even though this is feminine, so it wouldn't be confusing necessarily. But again, this just helps clarify it. So we have here then, and a man went from the house of Levi, and he married or took a daughter of Levi. Now, these are the parents, as we find out in the next verse, of this Moses character. So it's kind of an interesting way to begin the story of Moses. And it seems to be really emphasizing that Moses was a pure breed of Levite, right? So he was a pure Levite. His dad was from the Levite tribe. His mom was from the Levite tribe. And this could be taken perhaps in a couple ways. One, the role of Moses was really to be more of a priestly figure than a kingly figure. If you remember, Judah, the tribe of Judah, was told that they would have and hold the scepter, typically implying the role of a king. And so Moses was not meant to be a king. He was meant to be a priest and really served as a prophet as well. And so again, just kind of thinking about what was the role of priests. The priest was to interact with God and to carry out the word or commands, the Torah of the Lord especially sort of on behalf of the people. And so that's really what Moses ends up doing for Israel. And of course, that ends up being the job given to the Levites very specifically. And that becomes their inheritance even, as we read in other places. And so it was very important, according to Moses, as he wrote about and told us about his lineage, that he wanted to make sure that the reader knew he was not from the line of Judah, right? He was not a king. He was not even a prince. He was really just a priestly kind of figure, because he wanted to serve in that role, or he did serve in that role for the people, between them and between God. And so even as we learn about this greater Moses, and especially in the book of Matthew, so Jesus filled that role. And we kind of hear little glimmers of this, say at the Mount of Transfiguration, the Sermon on the Mount, and a few other kind of interesting analogies and phrasings that are used in especially the book of Matthew, that tell us that Jesus ends up being that new and greater Moses, as it was predicted in Deuteronomy 18 that there would be a prophet who would come one day like Moses. And we find out that he was not only like Moses, but much even greater than Moses. And he would bring a even greater law, as we hear in Isaiah 2 and Jeremiah 31 and many other places. And so definitely an interesting and important beginnings of the whole Bible, and really does set the groundwork for so many important and key ideas that we learn elsewhere throughout the Bible. All right. Well, we are wrapping up here for our letter Vav. So let's go ahead and finish with one last go through the alphabet. So follow along here with me. We have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right. Well, that is our letter Vav, the sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. I hope you learned something. I hope you'll share something, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.